Bretonnia are the nation of peasants, horses, and most importantly, toes. But among the 4 legendary lords, who is the best and who is the worst? Well, let's find out and rank every single one of their lords and factions, starting with Lord Luen, Leon Kerr. Starting with his faction effects, and they are total dookie. Campaign movement range is nice and all, but 50% aura size for lords when attacking is literally nothing. Leadership aura, you can't convince me that it does anything. And you can argue all you want about low leadership of the roster, but I know in my heart of hearts that it's pointless. The location is decent, with starting wars against the nearby vampires and greenskins. That said, with the allies in the area, it's difficult to gain any amount of land until you make it to Confederation technologies. Add on the fact that Norska and or Bellicor will likely sail down and raid your coastline, and you're trapped between allies that you don't want to invade, and Norska where there is no point invading. Battling Norska is a bit of a mixed bag depending on what they send, but Bretonian Cav should be able to crush the spirits of most things they send onto the front lines. On the battle side of things, thankfully, his army gains bonuses to leadership and attack when battling against pretty much anything evil aligned, which means everything he'll be battling for the first chunk of the campaign. However, outside of this, he has nothing when he's battling literally anyone else, meaning you might as well be using a generic lord. His unique skills don't really bring that much more to the table aside from very minor campaign bonuses and stat boosts for himself. His combat prowess is fine, but not really all that much better than a generic paladin. When he gets all his personal buffing skills online, he is a little bit better, but still, nothing all that special in the faction. I get the feeling that this one might be a little bit controversial, and honestly, I feel like this and the next entry could easily be swapped around. Luen might have an easy start to the point of inactivity, but when you really get down to it, the faction has no unique effects. Extra movement range for armies in a faction where you basically have to sit and wait for the game to happen to you. Then stat boosts for your troops fighting against, fair enough, the types of enemies you're almost always going to be battling. But aside from that, you may as well be using a minor faction with no effects. He's not an outstanding battler, yes he's very hard to kill, his armies don't gain any particular buffs outside of his own. He's not really that hard, but that doesn't necessarily make him good. Next, Alberic de Bordelot. First up, his faction effects, and they are a tiny bit of a mixed bag. Extra recruit rank and reduced recruitment time for all knight units is pretty top tier and will be useful from the beginning of the game all the way to the very end. Income from ports is okay, especially since you start on the coastline, and immunity to sea-based attrition is fine, but honestly, how often will you be on the water? His starting location on the Lustria coastline is certainly unique and just the teeniest bit isolated. You don't really have any options for friends outside of Marcus Wolfheart, and even that is a stretch. It's mostly a fight for survival against the various lizardmen, undead, chaos, and everything else in the glorious Lustria Bowl. At the very least, you have options, but it's not for the faint of heart. The Vampire Coast are a good matchup, but once lizards get to monsters, you're going to be in trouble, and even before that, their infantry will be very difficult to get rid of early on. His army effects will come in really useful in the early game and then never again once you grow out of those units. His unique skill tree is kinda bad. I mean, technically these skills are okay for buffing your campaign gameplay, but they offer nothing unique for his army and not even that much for himself. So whilst he may be able to build up his territory quickly and cheaply, he won't be able to defend it. He's for sure the charging specialist of the lords with the most reliance on charge bonus no matter what he's riding. The low defense makes him a little hard to keep alive if you don't use him for charging. So whilst he's strong in combat and does well as the game goes on, with his reliance on powerful mounts, he can be a little bit tricky to use well. Like I said with Luen, I can see Alberic being at the bottom of this list. His starting location is for sure far more challenging and his skill tree doesn't really do much to help him out. However, I had to give it to him for the buffs his faction brings to knights. Those effects will be strong from the first turn all the way to the 1000th if for some reason you decided to play that long. Well, the ones about knights, the other two are just okay. Yes, he will struggle a lot more in the early game, and yes, he is harder to use well in battle with his reliance on charging, but let's be honest here for a moment, you shouldn't really be playing Bretonnia if you don't want to try cycle charging. Between these last two, it comes down to if you value actual effects or a very easy start location, and today, I'm going to side with effects. In second place, we have Réponse de Lyonesse. Her faction effects are just okay. Extra control never hurts, and the upkeep reduction for heroes in her armies makes hero spam a lot more economically viable. Extra defense for questing knights is nice, but of course you'll outgrow them eventually, so again no value on your armies from her faction effects in the late game. The relations are really whatever, and just there to ensure you end up fighting who they want you to. Her starting location is at the very least unique, sending her down to the deserts of Nehekara. She is a little more isolated with a lot more enemies than the factions on the mainland, but there's still a couple of other Bretonians there to lend a hand and eventually land. Vampires and Tomb Kings aren't the greatest matchups in the world for Bretonnia, with a lack of backlines to target with their cav units, so it's also not going to be the easiest set of wars that you'll ever play. That said, if you can accept that, then there's a lot of options on where to go, since you're in a relatively central location on the coastline. In battle, her army effects, giving all peasant units more leadership and some resistance, is a fun gimmick and helps her early game, but later on, 5 leadership will make no difference, and resistance might as well not exist with all the magical damage floating around, especially with the faction she's meant to be battling. Her unique skills can help out with all the undead with a bunch of effects, including flaming attacks for the army to curb any healing going on. They can't resist the leadership aura, but aside from that, it's a strong selection of effects that help with everything from construction to her own battle prowess. In combat, she's kind of like a single entity Grail Guardian with strong melee stats and great armor piercing damage with a bonus versus infantry. Like any Bretonnian worth her salt, she can charge, but sustained combat works just as well, if not better. She starts the game strong and scales decently as the game goes on, depending on your skill choices. If I'm being honest, she's probably getting some bonus points because she's a pretty unique campaign among the Bretonnian lords. That said, I do also think that a few key aspects come together to make her into a pretty powerful lord and faction. The starting location with all the undead would be pretty rough, but that skill given her army flaming attacks makes such a massive difference that it cannot be understated. Especially against the vampires, it will negate so much of their healing power and make taking them down so much easier. Her specialization into the lower end of the faction's roster makes her early game fairly strong, but once she reaches the end game and the full power of the roster, she doesn't bring a ton unique to the table. Still, with the control and construction buffs, she can maintain and build up her territory, no problem. Honestly, opposite to the last ranking for the Beastmen, I feel the Bretonnian factions are all very close in power levels, but instead of being equally super strong, Bretonnians are all equally kinda bad. However, Rapunz has just a few aspects I believe give her an edge over the other two. But in first place, could it be anyone other than the Queen of Feet, the Fey Enchantress? Her faction effects are insanely simple, but I think they are the best of the bunch. Extra peasant capacity means you can field more units a lot earlier in the game without having to invest in your infrastructure or harm your income, and 15% replenishment is fantastic, especially for the entire faction. Replenishment is one of those things that's insanely overpowered if you get it stacked up, so getting this much right out the gate is truly crazy. As for starting location, it's perhaps one of the most boring in the game. You have that starting war against greenskins, followed by second war against some other greenskins, and then you just pretty much wait for the game to come to you. Either a kit from the south or the Beastmen, depending on who wins that fight, Heinrich from the north if he's feeling ambitious, but let's be honest, he never is, or possibly Noctilus if he gets bored of sacking Lothern, but who would? Similar to Luen, your only real way to expand is with the Confederation technologies, so just pray you can grind chivalry fast enough to pay for them. The matchup against greenskins is a mixed bag with their early front lines walking over peasants, but low leadership making them vulnerable to being charged. Once a kit makes his way over to you, you actually trade fairly well if he's delved into weapons teams, as long as you go into a fairly mobile army, which, if you're not, then why play Bretonnia? As for the army effects, she has no army effects. For real, all of these things are for her, and even then, they won't bring you any value because she can't fight. Her unique skill line, however, is pretty good. It's nothing crazy for the most part with decent campaign bonuses, some buffs to their army's magic and casters, but the star really is the melee and recruit rank buffs for both Grail units. These are the best units in the faction by far, and making them better is excellent once you get to the late game. You do have to get there first, but still. In actual combat, she's a little more than a prophetess with no real melee ability to speak of, no matter if we're talking mounted or not. She does have the Law of Life and she is really good at using it, which is great, but also available on generic lords, and granted, might be a little bit weaker, but still. Her abilities and items are okay, but in general, she's not the most impactful lord on the battlefield, at least in the traditional sense. Now, Faye has the same problem as Luen in the sense that she completes her starting war and then waits around for the game to happen to her. The major difference is she's so insulated from threats that you can pretty much just mash end turn and do well in this campaign for like 100 turns. Eventually, a kit will make his way up to you, but by that time, you should be more than ready and raring to go looking for a crumb of gameplay. All jokes aside, the starting location is just insanely defensible. Her faction effects are all so simple, but also insanely powerful, especially that replenishment. Her skill tree bringing buffs for Grail units makes your endgame armies ever stronger. It's not the most exciting campaign, and Faye may not bring a huge amount of obvious value to your battles, but her campaign is without a doubt the strongest in Bretonnia, and quite honestly, a little bit boring with how easy it can become. But that's my ranking for the Bretonnian Lords. Let me know your ranking in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Warhammer 3 ranking videos, then check out this one, all about the worst units for every faction. It's universally loved, and there's not a single comment disagreeing with me. Go check for yourself.